You know, people always talk about the American dream like it's this straight line. But for me, it felt more like a marathon through a minefield. And just when I thought I'd finally crossed the finish line and owned the stadium, someone decided to remind me that to them, I was still just a trespasser. My name is Alina Vance, and I spent 15 years building the Vance Collective from a single boutique into a hospitality empire that redefined luxury. About to tell you isn't about profit margins or branding. It's about the morning I walked into my own flagship property, the Meridian Heights, and realized that the culture I'd built was being rotted out from the inside. By a man who thought his last name gave him the right to own the air I breathed, I'd been hearing whispers for months. You know the kind? Those quiet, jagged reviews? On page 10 of travel sites where guests of color mentioned feeling watched or being asked for ID 3 times? And while my board dismissed it as noise, I knew that where there's smoke, there's usually a systematic fire, so I decided to go in cold no town car, no assistant. Just a carry-on bag and a plain navy dress that made me look like any other professional woman checking in for a midweek conference. The Meridian was my crown jewel, a limestone masterpiece overlooking the park that I had personally designed to feel like a sanctuary. But as soon as I stepped through those revolving doors, the air felt different, heavy, and the doorman didn't even look up from his phone until a young white couple in tennis gear hopped out of a Tesla behind me. And then suddenly he was all smiles and welcome back, sir, while I was left to haul my own bag across the marble floor. I stood in line at the front desk, watching a young man named Julian. I recognized his name tag from the hiring files greet. Everyone with this practiced Ivy League charm, but when it was my turn, his face just flattened like the sun had gone behind a cloud. And he didn't say good morning or welcome. He just stared at my hands and said, ID and a major credit card. And just so you know, we require a $500 incidentals hold for this. Room category. Now I knew our policy, and I knew that hold was only $200. And I watched him check in the guy before me without even glancing at his ID. So I felt that first spark of heat in my chest, but I kept my voice like silk, just pointing out that there seemed to be a double charge on my reservation. That's when Julian's eyes darted to the side, and this man stepped out from the back, Office Arthur Sterling, general manager. A guy whose family had been in the hotel business for 3 generations and who looked like he'd been carved out of a block of entitlement and expensive cologne. Arthur didn't even look at the computer screen. He just leaned over the counter, invading my personal space until I could smell the espresso on his breath, and he said, "Listen, sweetheart. Out. We don't do billing errors here. What we do have is a very clear understanding of who belongs in a 5-star lobby and who's trying to hustle a free night in the penthouse." I felt the blood rush to my face, and I told him as calmly as I could that I was a guest, and I expected to be treated with the dignity my reservation afforded me. But Arthur just laughed this dry, hollow sound that made the bellhop smirk hand. He said, "Dignity is earned, and quite frankly, you're making the other guests uncomfortable with this loud, aggressive energy. So why don't you take your little bag and find a motel that's more your speed before I have security show you the curb." I didn't move. I just looked him dead in the eye and said, "I'd like to speak to the owner." And that's when the world slowed down. As Arthur's face went from smug to purely venomous, and he reached across that counter, clamped his hand around my wrist so hard I knew there'd be marks. And when I told him to get his hands off me, he didn't back down. He stepped around the desk, walked right into my face, and he slapped me. The sound of his hand hitting my cheek snapped through that lobby like a gunshot. And for a second, the entire Meridian Heights went silent, the kind of silence that feels like it's bruising your ears. And I could feel the sting spreading across my face, the copper taste of blood where my tooth hit my lip, and I just stood there, unblinking. While the guests around us froze with their phones in their hands, Arthur was panting slightly, looking around at the staff as if expecting a round of applause for handling the problem, and he sneered, "Get out of my hotel." And that was the moment the bridge burned. Because I pulled my phone out with my free hand, my fingers steady as a surgeon's, and I hit the internal emergency line that only 3 people in the world have. When the chief of security picked up, I didn't yell. I just said, "Marcus, I'm in the lobby of the Meridian. I've just been physically assaulted by Arthur Sterling. And I want every camera feed from 9:02 a.m. to now locked down, encrypted, and sent to my private server, and then I want you to meet me in the center of the Seine with the entire on-duty staff now. The look on Arthur's face when he realized who was on the other end of that call, it wasn't just fear. It was the sound of a man's entire reality shattering, and as Julian at the front desk started to turn a ghostly shade of white, whispering, "Oh God, that's her. That's Vance," I just stood my ground. 9 minutes later, the lobby was a sea of black suits and housekeeping uniforms. 60 people standing in a jagged circle around the woman they'd ignored all morning, and I stood on the edge of the fountain, my face still burning, and I told them that because they had watched their leader assault a guest and did nothing but smirk or look away. They were all done, every single one of them. I fired the entire lobby staff on the spot, including Arthur, who was currently being cornered by 2 actual police officers I'd called, and I declared an immediate operational shutdown. But you see, that's where the story usually ends in movies, but in the real world, the old guard doesn't go quietly. And within 3 hours, my board of directors was lighting up my phone. It's telling me I'd overreacted and that Arthur's family held too much sway in the city's real estate market to be treated like a common criminal. They actually had the nerve to tell me that Arthur felt threatened and that the slap was a reflexive defensive maneuver. And by the next morning, a leaked video was trending online. Except it wasn't the whole video. Someone had edited it. To start right after the slap, making it look like I was just a power-mad CEO screaming at a distraught staff for no reason. And the hashtag cancel Vance was everywhere, fueled by the Sterling family's PR machine that wanted to paint me as the villain in my own tragedy. I spent 48 hours in a bunker of my own making, watching the stock price of my company dip as the old money investors started pulling out, claiming I was too emotional for the job, but they forgot one thing. I didn't get to be CEO by being a victim, got there by being a witness. I reached out to a woman named Clara, a housekeeper who'd been with the Meridian for 20 years and had been retired early after complaining about Arthur's behavior. And she met me in a quiet park with a shoebox full of voice memos she'd recorded over 5 years recordings of Arthur, calling guests the help, instructions to Julian on how to profile people at check-in, and even proof that the board knew about a dozen settlements he'd paid out to quiet other women he'd intimidated, armed. With that, I didn't go back to the board. I went to the people. I held a town hall in the very lobby where I was struck. I didn't hide the bruise on my face. I let the cameras see it while I played the unedited raw footage of the assault, followed by Clara's recordings that laid bare the rot in the Sterling legacy. I told the shareholders and the city that if they wanted a CEO who would take a slap and say thank you to protect the bottom line, they had the wrong woman. But if they wanted a company that actually stood for the safety of every person who walked through those doors, they had to choose. The fallout was a total eclipse of the old system. The board was forced to resign under public pressure. Arthur's family was investigated for a dozen labor violations, and the Meridian reopened. A month later, with a new staff led by Clara herself as the head of operations, I still have a faint, tiny scar on the inside of my lip where my tooth hit. And sometimes when I walk into a lobby, I still feel that split second of tension in my chest. But then I remember the look on Arthur's face when he realized that, no amount of family money could buy back the dignity he tried to take from me. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night and makes me wonder if we've really moved the needle. The board members who tried to cover for him, they didn't lose their homes. They just moved to different boards in different cities. And Arthur is currently out on bail, trying to sue me for wrongful termination and emotional distress. So I have to ask you, when the cameras are off and the hashtags stop trending, do you think people like Arthur actually learn? Or are we just rearranging the deck chairs on a ship that's always been designed to keep people like me in the engine room? Was I right to fire everyone who stood by? Or is the culture of silence something so deep that you can't just fire your way out of it? I'd really love to hear what you think, because honestly, I'm still trying to figure out if the price of standing your ground is worth the world you have to burn down to do it.